How is a genius made? For Fyodor Dostoevsky, one of the greatest novelists in history, the answer is buried deep in the frozen earth of Siberia. His time there wasn't just a punishment, it was a crucible, a trial by fire that would completely reshape his understanding of the human soul. And that's exactly where our story begins.
Okay, so picture this. January 1850. The brutal, endless expanse of Siberia. A man is on a sled, 2 weeks into a journey from St. Petersburg. He's shivering, of course, but the real weight he feels isn't just the cold. It's the 10-pound shackles that are locked to his hands and feet.
The years spent locked in a coffin. That's how Dostoevsky himself would describe the next 4 years of his life. Not as a prison sentence, but as being buried alive. So today, we're going to open that coffin and see what he found down there in the dark.
All right, our story really kicks off with the journey to this living tomb, a place that would become infamous as the House of the Dead.
For the next 4 years, this was going to be his only companion. A single book, a New Testament. It was a gift from the wives of the Decembrist revolutionaries, and they'd cleverly hidden a 10-ruble note inside its pages. But this was it, the only book he was allowed. Its words would have to be enough.
After another 11 days, he finally arrived, Omsk prison, a forced labor camp on the banks of the Irtysh River in western Siberia. And believe me, this wasn't just a prison, it was an inferno.
I mean, listen to Dostoevsky's own words, from a letter he wrote to his brother. You can just feel the claustrophobia, the absolute degradation. He said there wasn't even enough space to turn around, just packed in with hundreds of other men.
And the physical conditions, they were a relentless assault on the senses. We're talking unbearable heat in summer and then intolerable cold in winter. The floors were caked in an inch of filth, so slippery you could fall at any moment. The place was crawling with fleas, lice, and cockroaches. On top of all that, he was classified as a most dangerous prisoner, and his own body was betraying him with constant epileptic seizures, hemorrhoids, and fevers.
And those 10-pound shackles, they were a constant presence. He wore them on his hands and feet without a single break for 4 straight years. He even had to bathe in them. Just imagine that for a second.
His description of the prison bathhouse was so unbelievably harrowing that his contemporary, the famous writer Ivan Turgenev, could only describe it one way, truly Dante-esque, like something straight out of Dante's Inferno. This wasn't just suffering, this was a literary vision of hell made real.
But the physical torment was really only half the story. The deeper wound, the one that truly changed him, probably came from the men he was locked away with.
You have to understand, Dostoevsky was a nobleman. To the other prisoners, who were mostly peasants, murderers, and thieves, he wasn't a fellow convict. No way. He was the enemy. He represented the very class that had oppressed them for centuries. For the first 2 years, they actually took pleasure in watching him suffer.
And his initial reaction? Just pure revulsion. He was this sensitive, intellectual guy, suddenly thrown in with hardened criminals who could commit murder without even flinching. He was absolutely horrified by their capacity for violence and what seemed like a total lack of a moral compass.
But here, this is where the story completely pivots. Over those 4 years, something incredible started to happen. That wall of disgust and hostility began to crumble, and his revulsion slowly turned into a profound understanding, a deep, brotherly connection with the common Russian people that would define the rest of his life and all of his work.
So how does that happen? Right? How does empathy actually grow in a place that's designed to crush the human spirit? Well, the answers began to form in the darkness, and they were shaped by 2 really powerful forces.
It's a fair question. What could possibly grow in this Siberian coffin? The answer seems to boil down to 2 things that profoundly shaped his inner world during this time: his illness and his faith.
First, there was his epilepsy. The seizures were just debilitating. Afterwards, he said words would literally blacken and move away, and he'd be left confused for days. But here's the crazy paradox. In the few seconds before a seizure, he experienced this ecstatic aura, a moment of what he called unimaginable joy and complete harmony. He said he would trade his entire life for just those few seconds of bliss.
Second was his total intellectual and spiritual confinement. For 4 years, he couldn't hold a pen. He couldn't write a single word. And he had no other books to read. With one very profound exception, his entire universe of thought was reduced to a single text.
After 4 years with only the New Testament for company, his faith became this intensely personal and paradoxical thing. He would later write this, and it's just mind-blowing. He said, "If someone proved to me that Christ was outside the truth, I would choose to remain with Christ rather than with the truth." He's basically saying his belief is a choice, a defiant act of will, even if it goes against logic itself. That's the complex faith that was born in the darkness of that prison.
And then, on February 14, 1854, his 4-year sentence of hard labor finally ended. The lid of the coffin was lifted.
Now, his release wasn't total freedom. He was immediately sent off to begin mandatory military service way out in Semipalatinsk, near the Mongolian border. But for his mind, it was a true rebirth. And what was the very first thing he did? Get this. After 4 years with only the Bible, this man, absolutely starved for ideas, immediately writes to his brother asking for books. And not just any books, the great German philosophers, Kant and Hegel. You can just feel how desperate his mind was to engage with the world again.
And of course, he began to write. He channeled all of that suffering into his groundbreaking book, Notes from the House of the Dead. It was a sensation, the first novel ever to expose the realities of the Russian prison system. But it was more than that. It was the seed from which all his future masterpieces would grow. The 4 years that were meant to break him, to bury him, ended up resurrecting him. It was in that hell that he saw that even in the most depraved souls, there was a spark of humanity. It's the central question of all his great works, right? Can a murderer like Raskolnikov find redemption? Well, this is where that question was born.
Dostoevsky's time in Siberia wasn't just some biographical detail. It was the key that unlocked his genius. And it leaves us with this incredible question. How does a man, utterly broken by suffering, emerge as one of the world's most powerful observers of the human soul? Maybe the answer is that sometimes you have to enter the coffin to truly understand what it means to be alive.